All right, good evening, everybody. We are here again tonight to finish up our reading on The Good Father by Benji Alexander. We had some technical difficulties last night. We thought we might be having them again tonight, but it looks like everything is a go as far as we can tell. We're going to give it one last check while we're opening everything up. And we left off last week at courage. So this is where we're going to start our reading tonight. If you guys have not already downloaded the ebook, please do that and either join in or you can look at it here. We've decided we're going to share our screen and read the book with you. And that way you get to see the artwork and see how worth it is just to download the book yourself. So anyway, we are sitting on courage right now.
We are sitting on
We are
courage
sitting
right now.
on courage. And Josiah just thumbs up, we're at a go, everything looks good, and we're not having any technical difficulties this evening with our sharing. So anyway, Josiah, would you like to say anything?
Sure. All right. So if you weren't with us last time, a little bit of a recap. We're going through the story of the prodigal son, and he demanded his inheritance and fled with his inheritance and into the people that Jesus was telling the story to, as well as those in the story that makes not only the son a ill looked upon man, it makes the father an ill looked upon man. It makes him a villain in all their eyes in this story. And as the son just kind of indulges and blows all his money, while the father is not angry, he's not upset, he's home, he's thinking about him, and the son is running out of money, is starting to realize that he was trying to fill a hole in his heart. He's never been loved, and it goes to a deeper truth that he doesn't have the courage or the fortitude to get to the deepness of to come to an understanding. So where we left off, he had the choice between taking care of the pigs, which is considered an unclean job, very unclean in their eyes, or to face the shame of going home to his father, and he decided to stay and feed the pigs. But this next chapter is called Courage, and it continues. There was a famine, obviously. The famine continued, stripping the land bare. Hope for this nation evaporated like the streams. He finally decided that returning to his father was his only survival option. The withdrawal symptoms were subsiding. His mind began to clear a little more. Throughout this story, the father is a constant. He is always a good father. The culture of the day had judged him as a moral failure, despite the fact that this father's morals clearly surpassed their interpretation of morality. This father has his own normal. He has his own standard. And that standard is a love that never fails. The Father's standard is a mercy that triumphs over judgment. The culture of the day had judged the Father incompetent for failing to manipulate and control his son with threats, punishment, and violence. He ignored their condemnation and judgment, refusing to stoop to their shallow level of relationship, which was infused with manipulation and control. The father had something far more beautiful in mind. He was willing to do whatever it would take to share an authentic, mutual, loving relationship with his son. The father had made himself totally vulnerable before his son by respecting the son's freedom and power to choose who, how, and when he would love. The father's courageous vulnerability empowered the son to break his heart over and over again. And there is one of the fine pieces of art that we actually weren't able to share last time. If you're watching this is part of the artwork that is of this book, and I do recommend purchasing it if you can.
It's free.
Oh, it's free. If the son had understood how loved he had always been and how much his father had always desired a relationship with him, he would have never come to a place where he didn't care if his father lived or died. The reality is that his son misperceived who his father really was. The son had a false definition of his father, which caused a dramatic relational disconnection. The belief that he was inadequate, unworthy, and unlovable prevented him from ever seeing the truth that his father had always loved him with a perfect, unconditional love. Even as he embarks on that dry and dusty road toward home, it is clear that he still has no grasp of the extreme love that his father has for him. I wonder how many times the fear and shame stopped him in his tracks or caused him to turn back towards the pigs or even run towards them. Leaving hadn't been easy for his son, for the son, excuse me. There were internal and external obstacles. One obstacle being that his ugly bearded boss didn't like his slaves running away. Officially, he wasn't a slave, but he didn't exactly have a job contract. In the abusive eyes of his ugly bearded boss, who didn't care if he lived or died, he was effectively a slave. He slipped out in the night with a stash of stolen pig food to eat on the road and put as much distance between himself and his ugly bearded boss as he possibly could. For the first week, he traveled at night and hid by day. He has now lost count of how many days he has been walking, hungry, exhausted, and emotionally drained. The sun reaches the border of Israel. After 3 more days of walking, he can finally see his village on the horizon. He was wearing a ragged cape with a large hood that covered most of his face. He didn't want to be seen, and so far, nobody on the road had recognized him. However, as the hills started to become more familiar and he started coming closer to the village that he grew up in, other travelers on the road began looking twice. He was a curious sight, with his downcast look, bare feet, poor dress, and unpleasant aroma. He appeared a little suspicious. Perhaps they thought he was a runaway slave. A boy he went to school with walked right past him. Did he recognize me? Thought the son to himself in shock as his heart began thumping. They both kept walking. He had to go right through the village to get to the farm, so he decided to walk that section in the dark. He found a discreet place to camp a day's walk from home. He hid there and tried unsuccessfully to sleep until just after midnight. Although he was used to fear, anxiety, and stress, he was now experiencing whole new levels of emotional chaos. But he could see no other viable survival option. Die with the pigs or face his father. Honestly, right now, as the fear and shame ravaged him internally, dying with the pigs was becoming more and more appealing. Compared to how savagely his own mind was treating him right now, his ugly bearded boss was saintly. The son easily escaped from his ugly bearded boss, but he could not escape himself. And there's the schoolyard friend seeing him and looking back. Great picture there.
Mm-hmm.
Internal voice of condemnation was a prison in which he had lived his whole life. The closer he came to his father, the more intense the mental self-harm became. If he had walked so far to get to where he now was, he may actually have chosen death with the pigs, rather than facing his father. His feelings of self-hatred reached a record high. Every step that he took towards his father and towards the consequences of his past was exponentially harder than the last. Head down and anxiety high, he forced himself to walk on. It was a motionless morning. The road into town was dark, silent, and empty. This was it. Today he would see his father. And as he walked, he pondered as many potential outcomes as possible. Every one of them scared him. Every one of them reinforced his beliefs in his own inadequacy, and every one of them endorsed this constantly growing hatred of himself. As he walked silently alone through the darkness, he considered the fact that today could be the day that he died. What had he accomplished with his life? More harm than good, he thought to himself. Every thought he had seemed to inflict another level of punishment. Even his own mind had turned against him. It took several hours to make his way to the edge of the village. A few lamps burned in houses in the village itself, and he moved from shadow to shadow. The occasional dog barked and roosters crowed at random, but he had made it through the village unseen. Soon he stood on the crest of the hill, overlooking the village behind him. The sun was rising. The cover of darkness was all but gone. Half a day's walk lay before him, and his past and future. Even though he was walking quickly, his whole body was covered in a cold sweat dread. He had already passed a handful of people in the dark. The road would now start to get much busier. Less than an hour later, one of his old neighbors approached with 3 donkeys fully loaded and bound for the village. "Shalom," said the neighbor. "Shalom," replied the son with his face to the ground. For a second, the neighbor thought he recognized the voice. After they passed each other, they both looked at the same time, and for a brief moment they locked eyes. The neighbor knew instantly who he was. The son saw condemnation begin to flicker like hellfire in his eyes. They both turned and picked up their pace. The son knew the news of his return would very soon be known throughout the entire district. The severe consequences he had left behind had waited patiently for his return. The neighbor knew as well as the son did the risk the son had taken in returning. The neighbor knew that there may be a stoning today. He took upon himself the responsibility to tell the village the news. Everything else went on hold as the demand for justice took center stage. The son hurried on as discreetly as he could. Despite his desire to remain invisible, a number of people recognized him. He heard some people speaking to him, others shouting at him, but he could barely even register their existence. He was under so much internal pressure that it required every ounce of his focus and energy to take each and every step. He was consumed with agonizing thoughts of his father. He blocked out everything else and kept walking. Vulnerability. Would you like to read vulnerability?
4 chapters, up to you.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Vulnerability. Alright, finally, the father's farm was in view. The climatic reunion drew ominously close. The son took one more step over the horizon line and came into the father's view. The son had no idea what the father's response was going to be. He paused before walking a little further down the hill. Suddenly, he saw that his father was sprinting towards him. The son stopped right there, literally frozen in panic. He was unaware that a mob had gathered and was fast approaching on the road, just a short distance behind him. Justice was a serious community responsibility. Now justice would finally be served. At best, the son thought he may be able to desperately beg for mercy and possibly be given the role of a servant in his father's house. That would be better than dying with the pigs and dealing with his ugly bearded boss. His best case scenario was begging for the right to become a servant. His worst case scenario was either that beating he deserved or the stoning that the village would demand. One thing was very clear. The son believed that because of his actions he had forfeited any previous right to sonship. At least the crowd agreed with something in this story that Jesus was telling. This son's behavior had completely forfeited him from any rights to sonship ever. The closer the father ran, the more terrified the son became. All the strength that he had mustered to come this far and overcome so much fear and shame had taken its toll. He was at a breaking point. As he watched the unusual speed of his father charging down the road, his sense of alarm began to grow. He began to shake physically as fear and shame rumbled through his veins like thunder. He could no longer hide from his past. He couldn't self-medicate. He couldn't escape. He was forced to face reality. He was forced to face this great tear in his heart. His father quickly drew near. The father had been watching, waiting, and longing for his son to come home, longing for relationship, longing for reconciliation, longing for intimacy, longing for his son to see him for who he really was and not as the monstrous father that the son's imagination had invented. The father had never been able to overcome the son's persuasion that he was unworthy of love. The son's own persuasion that he was unlovable had always prevented him from receiving his father's love, no matter how desperately the father prolonged to pour it out on him. Because the son never received love, he never felt loved, and the son used this unloved feeling as justification for his theory that his father had never loved him and that he would never be worthy of love. The son's image of the father was so warped that he expected the worst from this moment. His father kept running, not jogging. The father was in full flight. Look at that. It's one of those wonderful pictures.
All the villagers expecting
right.
judgment and wrath.
They're almost probably demanding it,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
And his head hung in shame there. The father just open arms, my son. Okay. Jesus' crowd of listeners can't believe that the son didn't die with the pigs. How did he manage to escape justice once again? But now that the son has been forced to crawl back to his father, justice can at least be served. Can at last be served. How cunning of the father to wait until the son has to come crawling back before administering a severe punishment, on top of his ultimate humiliation. Perhaps there is hope for this father to redeem himself in the eyes of the crowd. The father is running towards this defiled, useless, disgusting boy, and this rebellious, wicked outcast is about to get the pent-up wrath of an offended father unleashed on him in full fury. At last, the father's wrath will be fully satisfied. The son can't take his eyes off his father. This was it. This was the moment of truth. His entire focus was consumed by his father. He did not see the growing crowd behind him, gathering stones and drawing dangerously close. They were rushing. They were aggressive. They were demanding justice. They were demanding punishment. Fueled by wrath, they raced towards the son. The father could see the crowd coming. He had sat through many conversations with his own relatives, neighbors, and friends as they told him what they would do to his son if he ever showed his face again. There was no way he was going to give them a chance to inflict their form of justice. Inspired by love, the father raced towards the son. Oh, look at this. It's a huggy, it's a lovey-dovey huggy picture.
That's the graphic that you chose for the announcement of this reading the book.
That's actually the one that is on the main cover, I believe. So, heart pounding, chest heaving, covered in sweat, the father reaches his son. He instantly embraces him with a deep compassion and a fiery love, consuming the son in arms of love. The father holds his child who once was lost but now is found. The son could not hug back. He could not express affection. He just stood there, rigid yet trembling. The son is obsessed with and oppressed by the conviction of his own inadequacy. He breaks down and gets to the root issue of what he has been secretly feeling forever. It all comes out before his father as he gets more vulnerable than he has ever been and admits the truth of what's really causing the emotional turmoil in his heart. Everything inside him explodes. The tears, the fears, the shame, the desperation. I'm not worthy to be called your son, he screamed. Tears and emotion are everywhere. This conviction that he was inadequate and unworthy to be called his son is what drove him from home in the first place. Now it all comes out, messy and painful, tears, snot, raw emotion, and full exposure. The son's broken and infected heart bleeds out before his father. The son's tears cover his father, and the father's kisses cover his son. A seat at the table.
Okay, good. It does keep going. I was like, wait a second. Right. A seat at the table. The unconditional acceptance, the love, the honor, and the favor the Father lavishes on the Son leaves everyone bewildered. The crowd listening to Jesus cannot believe that what has just happened. This is the worst, most scandalous story they'd ever heard. It makes no sense. In fact, it makes them vibrate with anger. The son is speechless, hyperventilating, gasping for breath and choking on the rising stream of tears. The father is ecstatic. I love that. In the midst of all that, the father's just ecstatic. That's not the heart of the father. When the older brother hears about what has happened, he is wild with anger. The only one that Jesus' audience can relate to is the older brother and his outrage at the absence of the flogging of a lifetime or worse. But as the story sinks in, as Jesus' audience reflects on the foreign love, a deep place in their hearts is jealous to experience it for themselves. They begin to feel a once dormant, deprived part of their hearts physically aching to know the radical love that has been poured out on the Son. In that moment, some of them ask themselves, what would it be like to be loved so unconditionally? Shouts begin to rise up from the gathering. Deadly demands for justice ring out from among the priests, the elders, the lawyers, the cousins, the uncles, the aunts, and the friends. What will the father's decision be? What shall be done with this worthless son? They grip their rocks in rage. The gentle love and kindness in the father's eyes blindsides the captive and captivates the son. They immerse themselves in each other's gaze. The father's eyes tell a story that the son has never known. The son has known the looks of rejection, hatred, brutality, and condemnation, but no matter how deeply he reaches into his father's eyes, there is not a trace of these things. He plunges desperately into them, expecting that rejection is hidden somewhere inside. His father's eyes are baptizing him in the purest love that he has ever encountered. The rejection that he assumed was there had never existed. Waves of acceptance crash over him again and again. He can't understand why he had never seen it there before, but he can see it now. He can see it clearly now. The eyes of the Father are a cosmos of ecstasy and delight in his Son. The Son is discovering that he has always been the focus of his Father's delight. The Son can see that this limitless love in his Father's eyes would take 1,000 lifetimes to explore. It is beyond his capacity to understand. He doesn't know why he's never seen it before, but he cannot ignore it. He cannot resist it, and he cannot live without it. For the first time since he was a little boy, he buries his face in his father's chest. They grip each other in an embrace that simultaneously communicates a lifetime full of pain and a future full of hope. I know, right? The father has an unprecedented response to the son's begging and the crowd's demands. He does not let the son continue to berate himself and beg like a slave. His father breaks everyone's cultural protocols and expectations, and he demonstrates unconditional love for his son. The son himself is in serious shock. Where is the wrath of the monstrous father that he believed had never loved him? The father's love collides with his false perceptions like a sledgehammer on glass. The core beliefs that he built his world on are shattering. The love is tangible and strong, so strong that the son loses all his strength. An electric love surges right through him. He melts in his father's arms. The father holds him up in this eternally desired expression of delight. For the first time in his memory, the son drops his guard. For a moment, his sense of inadequacy eclipsed by his father's love, and receives this divine love into the depths of his love-starved soul. His love-famished soul feasts at the same time on an uncontrollable flood of tears, and snot and pain continue pouring from him. The double-edged blade of love penetrates the heart. It's hurting, but it's healing. Sweet to the lips, but bitter to the mouth. Eat this book. Sorry, going off top here. That's Revelations, by the way. The father continues to demonstrate to the son and to everybody watching his unreserved endorsement of the legitimacy of his sonship. At this stage, the son's world is spinning out of control. The father called for his best robe. Immediately, the father placed his most exquisite garment on his son. This robe is a statement of the Father's protection. The moment that the Father's robe was placed on the Son, every condemning accusation against the Son was canceled. Clothed in righteousness. The Son is now wearing the best robe of the household. It is his Father's covering. It represents the Father meeting the Son's need for protection. It is a declaration of safety to the Son. This act of love is casting out all fear of punishment. This act of love is canceling every offense and every accusation of judgment and condemnation associated with the Son's failures. This act of love is a declaration of total vindication and reconciliation. This act of love is a declaration that the Father has completely and freely given his Son. This act of love is an undeserved declaration of redemption and freedom from the darkness of the Son's past. The level of offense in the crowd is now rising. Where is the justice? To them this is immoral, scandalous, against the laws of God and nature. This is blasphemy, heresy, and surely Gentile theology all in one. They believe that justice looked like punishment. But the Father is overwhelmed with delight. He has no regard for the crowd's preconceived assumptions, that he would pour out wrath on his Son. The Father had no intention of punishment. It wasn't what he had ever wanted. To the Father, justice looked like redemption, and he gets exactly what he wants, his Son. The crowd's appetite for blood is left completely unsatisfied by the Father. Moments later, the Father rushes a ring onto his Son's finger. This ring symbolizes identity. In giving this ring, the Father is meeting the Son's extreme need for identity. The Son is saying that everything which the Son once believed defined him, all his failures, all his dark secrets, everything negative that had ever been said about him, or that had been believed about him, or that he had believed about himself, is irrelevant. This ring symbolizes the name, nature, and identity of family, and declares to the Son that he is exclusively defined by his Father. This ring declares to the Son that the only valid reference point for his identity comes from his Father. By doing this, the Father also powerfully communicates that this Son has a home and a place of belonging in his family. He will be seated at the family table at the Father's side. His Son can't stand. He is overwhelmed with love and emotion. He collapses to the ground and servants run to him. Sandals are tied to his feet. Slaves and servants did not wear sandals. This act of the Father was a declaration of provision. The Father was saying that he would not receive him back a slave or a servant, that he would receive him back as a son, as he would provide, and he would provide as a father does. Each of these three actions endorsed the legitimacy of the Son's sonship. Each of these actions revealed the nature of the Father to supply protection, identity, and provision. Following this, the Father killed the fattened calf. This calf would have been enough food to feed the whole village. It was a custom for wealthy families to invite the whole town or village to a banquet to celebrate bar mitzvah. Bar mitzvah is a coming-of-age celebration which took place on a son's 13th birthday, where a son is legally and publicly recognized as a son with all the legal rights, privileges, and responsibilities of sonship. This was not an official bar mitzvah celebration, but the Father was making a public statement similar to that of a bar mitzvah. The Father was publicly celebrating, recognizing, and endorsing the full rights, privileges, and responsibilities of his Son's sonship. The whole village was invited to witness the Father testify to the legitimacy of the Son's sonship. The Father wanted to endorse his Son's sonship in the most public way possible. Both the community around the Father and in the story and Jesus' audience were having a major culture shock as they tried to process the actions of this eccentric, heretical, villainous Father. This Father defied their cultural expectations for wrath and punishment and dumbfounded them with unconditional acceptance and extravagant love. The lost son, was received home as the object of the Father's delight, while the sun still smelt like a pigsty. The Father had wrapped him in his passionate embrace. Instead of separation, condemnation, wrath, humiliation, and bloodshed, this Son is sitting in the best seat at his Father's side, wearing the best robe, with a ring on his finger and brand new sandals on his feet, feasting at a celebration thrown in his honor to endorse the legitimacy of his sonship. This Son has discovered the seat at the table, seated beside his Father. This Son is finally found where he belongs. Instead of dining with the pigs, he is dining with his Father. Although the crowd was confused, speechless, and offended, the story awakened within each of them a deep and ancient desire to experience such a love for themselves. A jealousy for such a pure love began to stir the open wounds of lack and inadequacy in their own hearts. Could such a love be any more than mythology or heresy? They reflected on their own experiences of what a father's love could look like. They all had different images coming to mind, the good, the bad, and the ugly. All of their experiences of what the Father's love is like were different, but all of them paled in contrast to the extravagant love of this Father. Could I ever hope to experience a love like this? They wondered secretly to themselves. Even the Son is seriously questioning whether this is too good to be true. Is this really happening? All his expectations, his entire worldview, his reality has been completely devastated by his Father's love. Truth is staring him right in the face and declaring that life is better and brighter than he could ever imagined. His heart, his brain, his emotions, his spirit, and his soul are exploding all at the same time. It is too much to grasp the full meaning of everything. This love has blown a brain fuse in the Son. He makes the best decision of his life and chooses to simply receive his Papa's love. Even though it's beyond his comprehension and his mind is spinning, his heart knows that he belongs in this seat at his Papa's table. Truth is convincing him that he is perfectly loved. For the first time in his life, he is starting to see his Papa as he really is. He is discovering that his Papa is a perfect lover. The more accurately he sees his Papa, the more he loves him. The offense and hatred he once held towards his Father had been swallowed up by love and honor. His Papa's love is redefining everything that he ever knew about love. He has never felt so safe. He has never felt so secure. In the context of perfect safety, vulnerability is losing its terror. Surrounded by safety, authenticity, curiosity emerges like a snail's antenna. The masks of false identities that the Son had worn as self-protection mechanisms were becoming irrelevant. The unconditional acceptance is drawing the Son outside of himself. He is discovering that nothing he has ever experienced compares to the ecstasy and the bliss of this perfect love. This once lost son has found a seat at the table. This once lost son is discovering the bliss of sonship. A genuine smile lightens up his face. His eyes radiate with the delight of a son who understands that he is perfectly loved. And that, well, we can read the conclusion, but that is the story.
Indeed. That
Wow.
is such a good story. Like my heart's just like, oh, it's so sweet.
That's okay.
Because that's whenever I think of the story, and I've always read the story, that's what I always saw was the good father. But nobody ever mentioned that. They always mentioned the prodigal son, and they always focused on the prodigal son. And I'm like, what about the father? He didn't even mention his
and the fact that
offense.
the father was villainized in the eyes
Right.
of everybody pretty much, and that he would take that stance and how it triggered that in their hearts. And they searched, they couldn't find a love anywhere near close to that. And it was a love, and he, all he could do was accept it. Yeah, that's just fantastic. That's fantastic. All right, so you know what? I'll read the conclusion.
You want to go ahead?
The term sonship is used here in a generic, non-gender specific way. The term identity is used here to refer to the generic identity of humanity as those made in the image of God, not to a person's unique individuality or personality. This parable of the Good Father is Jesus' most masterful articulation of the good news. Jesus exquisitely communicates the essence of the good news with power and precision. Jesus presents his definition of perfect theology, who God is. and his definition of the gospel, what the good news is, in one of the most heart-gripping stories in the entire Bible. A father, a lost son, betrayal, scandal, secrets, fear, shame, heartbreak, villainy, tragedy, brokenness, addiction, bondage, isolation, courage, vulnerability, forgiveness, love, redemption, identity, reconciliation, restoration, sonship, family, belonging, hope. This story incorporates the most powerful themes in life. It answers the most profound questions in life. The pinnacle revelation in the midst of all is the unconditional, unfailing, unparalleled love of our Father in heaven, whose unshakable love conquers the most hideous betrayals without flinching or being damaged or reduced or inhibited or restricted in any way. It's a love that defies every adversity and never relents. A love that yearns for redemption, not punishment, and reconciliation, not distance.
Wow.
That of which is the purpose of sin, the purpose of being exposed is so that we may draw closer to our Father.
Exactly what the next thing
Mhm.
says is, using this story, Jesus exposes the root issues of the human's heart.
There
Just
it
as you
is.
were saying.
There it is. Go ahead.
As you were saying, I was reading, I was like, yes, exactly. That's exactly what
That's
Vinci was
exactly what
thinking
it
at that
says.
very moment.
Yeah, like-minded.
Absolutely.
You want to read?
Sure. I mean,
No, go ahead.
all right. Using this story, Jesus exposes the root issues of the human heart, believing that we are inadequate and that we won't have enough. These beliefs flow from false definitions of our Father in heaven and false definitions of our own identity. When we have a false definition of who our Father in heaven is, we come to believe that we will lack the things that we need: protection, identity, provision. Whenever we believe that we will be in lack, it produces fear. The nature of love, the nature of the Father, is to supply. Lack produces fear, but love supplies. That's how love casts out all fear. Love brings a promise with it that there will be more than enough. Lack produces fear, but love supplies. Love supplies the truth that we need to be free from fear. Love supplies the revelation that our hearts need to be fully persuaded of our Papa's provision. When we are fully persuaded that our Father in heaven will provide for us, then it will be clearly evidenced by the reality that there is no fear, anxiety, or worry in our lives. The only way to get free from fear is by discovering what his Son discovered. Eventually, he discovered that his Father's love was unconditional, and he had always been loved.
Nothing he did or didn't do ever stopped the Father from loving him. That is who the Father is, a perfect lover. After a lifetime of living in an unnecessary love deficit, the Son came to realize that his actions and mindset did not alter or diminish the Father's love. They altered his ability to experience the present reality of his Father's love. If that doesn't hit home with so many people.
Right.
It took great courage from the Son to make the journey home and to become vulnerable with his Father. However, it was in the context of his courage and vulnerability that he discovered the present reality of the love with which the Father had always loved him. The Father's unconditional acceptance establishes an atmosphere of perfect safety, an atmosphere that is safe to come home to, a place where it is safe to be honest, real, transparent, and vulnerable, a place where it is safe to be ourselves. In the context of unconditional acceptance, we can expose ourselves and still be loved. We can be known. We can be intimate without fear of rejection. In this place of unconditional acceptance, we are given the opportunity to build trust. As we protect and steward trust with safe behavior, intimacy grows. As intimacy develops, a sense of belonging grows with it. As the Son courageously came home into the atmosphere of safety and acceptance, his heart melted. He responded to his Father from a place of offense towards his Father to a posture of honor. He discovered that offense shut his heart down to receiving love, but honor opened his heart up to receive his Father's love. Honor opened the floodgates for a baptism in the Father's love.
It's so good. Honor open the
He was
floodgates
distracted by
for
he was
baptism
distracted by his
of
own
love.
false belief in who he was
Right.
and that he was loved. He was loved. A false definition of our Father in heaven is not only the source of lack and fear, it is also the root of inadequacy and shame. We were made in the image of our Father and our Papa in heaven. He is the blueprint of our divine design. We were made perfectly in His image, and He alone defines us. However, if we are not fully persuaded that we are perfectly made in the image of our Father in heaven, then we begin to experience feelings associated with beliefs of inadequacy. There it is. Perfection is the secret standard inside of every human soul that we measure ourselves by. If we come to believe that we are less than perfect in any way, then inadequacy and shame begin to spread like a vicious rash on our soul. The pathway to freedom from shame is becoming fully persuaded that despite all that you have been through in life, the only valid reference for your identity is your Papa in heaven.
Amen.
Nothing we have ever experienced in life has any authority to define that which our Father in heaven has already exclusively defined in His image. Our Papa in heaven made us in His image, and we have been forever defined by Him alone. Believing in lack will produce fear, and believing in inadequacy will produce shame. Humans are allergic to shame. Shame is a toxic substance. Shame comes from believing that you as an individual are inadequate in some way. Isn't that how we're programmed? Live in lack, live in want.
Orphan children.
All right. The belief that we are inadequate comes from a perception that things we have experienced have authority to define our identity. This world is full of extreme trauma. I have more friends than I can count that have been through extreme abuse and trauma. The ones that get free from shame are the ones that embrace the truth that their experiences have no authority to define their identity.
There it is.
The negative words spoken over their lives, the neglect they suffered, the rape, the violence, the incest, the rejection, the betrayal, the failure, the sin, the wounds, the fall, the works. None of these things have any authority to define us. Nothing that we have ever experienced has the authority to redefine that which the Father has already exclusively defined in His image.
Yes.
We have been exclusively defined by our Father in heaven. He is the only valid reference point for our identity. He is the blueprint of our divine design. If we are experiencing condemnation, shame, or a belief of unworthiness in any expression in our lives, it is because we have allowed ourselves to be defined by something that has no authority to define us. This is one outstanding and exclusive definition of our identity that has executive authority to define us, and that this is Jesus. Jesus perfectly revealed and modeled our Father in heaven, and in doing so, He perfectly articulated humanity's true identity as those made in God's image. Every form of information that you have ever received that gives definition to your identity, which is not in harmony with what Christ reveals, is not valid. Jesus called the Son of Son for the entire story. Jesus called the Son a son for the entire story. Even in His darkest hour, the Son was still a son, as a son can. The Son was still as son as a son can be. Discovering the present reality of His sonship required the lies in His belief system to be shattered entirely. Well, that sounds like the wheat separating from the chaff.
Right.
What do you know?
Some good stuff.
His whole way of processing what defined him had been completely rewired. He had always believed that what he did, what people said, and what he experienced defined his identity. This way of thinking is a system rigged to fail, a system that will keep us chained to inadequacy, shame, and condemnation. The Son discovered that the legitimacy of His sonship had never been compromised by all His failures and rebellion. As the Father endorsed the authenticity of His sonship, He began to see the only valid reference point for His identity was His Father. He was exclusively defined by His Father, and He had always been a son as a son can be. Combining these two revelations in our lives empowers us to discover the bliss of sonship that this Son discovered in Jesus' gospel narrative. Discovering unconditional love and unconditional sonship is what seats us at our Father's table. Our Papa is a perfect lover, and we are exclusively made and defined in His image. We are perfectly loved, and we are perfectly worthy of perfect love. We have not been qualified or defined by our own failed attempts at perfection. We have been qualified and defined by our Papa in heaven, who made us in His image and who declared that we are His beloved children.
Ah, yes.
Just like the son in the story, your Father in heaven longs to have you return home. He has reserved a seat at the table for you. He longs to celebrate you the way the son in the story was celebrated. He longs to feast with you at the family table. He longs to place his robe of protection over you, to place a defining ring on your finger, to promise you provision and welcome you home as a beloved child. He wants you to take your place at the banqueting table. Your Papa longs to publicly celebrate and endorse the legitimacy of your sonship. He wants the whole world to know that you are perfectly, unconditionally, and extravagantly accepted and loved by Him.
Oh, one more time. He wants the whole world to know that you are perfectly, unconditionally, and extravagantly accepted and loved by Him. Amen.
That is a story. A little
That
bit
is
about
the
the author. We'll
story.
keep that on there if you guys want to read that, if you will.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a good story.
Yep.
A lot of truths in there.
You guys are more than welcome to read a little bit about Benji, but I've always loved that story, and he just brought it to life even deeper, like with just bringing in the emotions, the real rawness of what was probably truly, a very tough situation. And we don't really think of how tough things are whenever we read some of the Bible. We just, oh yeah, because we weren't there.
Mm-hmm.
But in that moment, how it must have been, he portrayed that
Well,
very well.
I read somewhere it says, nothing comes into our lives uninvited. We're always inviting poverty or prosperity through our quality of thoughts. I mean, the further the son's thoughts went down the hole, the more his reality around him did the same. On earth as it is in heaven, we create our own reality through our thoughts and actions.
Absolutely.
Which is why, very much it's His mercy that some of us can't create an awful lot because we have no self-control.
Well,
Chiefest.
no condemnation.
No.
Condemnation.
I'm into that pool too.
Yeah.
I'm into that pool too to an extent.
Yeah.
We're all growing. We're all learning.
Well, it does not. Let's see. It's 11:18. Did you have anything else that you would like
It's
to talk
11:18.
about? This is Benji and his family, by the way, you guys. Beautiful royal family there. Benji's the one who wrote the book. There's some more upcoming projects that he's working on. If you guys don't have the book, it's a good book, and it's got other stuff in it, spoken word, video project, Redefine Me. There's different stuff in here also that we're not going to go into today, but definitely it's worth going and downloading.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's written, you have one teacher, one master. But it's also written that my people perish for lack of knowledge. It's good to subject yourselves to teachers. It's not that you make an idol out of your teachers, that you're presenting yourself to knowledge. And what we do is we're to take the knowledge that we take in and bring it before our Father, that He alone may divide truth from not.
Absolutely.
So that's why we do. That's why we study to show ourselves approved. That's how we test the spirits. It's so we bring everything before Him. That we can have our own opinions about things, bring them before Him, and not only does it reveal truth, He goes deeper and reveals why we believed the way that we believe. Deep always cries out to deep. So it's good to take in other people's opinions. It's good to listen to teachers and what have you. But that doesn't equal your personal relationship in any way, shape, or form.
No.
Fellowship is extremely important, but it needs to start at home. It needs to be established in us first.
Absolutely. I think having teachers in your life in some capacity is a good thing. But I think mostly it's because a lot of times they bring to remembrance things that we need to think about or focus on, because we get so just caught up in the everyday and we don't think about certain things. And then there's also, you know, certain times where they actually help expose our own stuff, and they help reveal our own stuff because of our own offense of what they're saying. And then, you know, we're able to, you know, to bring that up before Papa and be like, you know, what's this all about?
Mm.
And it ends up exposing us, and we're able to grow from it. So, but like you said, chomp on the meat and spit out the bone.
But if all you're doing is looking for the bones, you'll miss out on the meat.
Exactly.
You know, the wheat separating from the chaff is supposed to be a natural byproduct relationship. If all you're doing is looking for scrutiny, then scrutiny is what you're going to find. If all you're doing is looking for somebody to teach you, and then you know, I lost my train of thought with that. But you know where I was going with it. Perks of being live.
Right. No. I think that the best way to learn is through Papa by himself, absolutely 100%. But I also think that there's people that are gonna help us along our walk.
Yeah, co-laborers, co-heirs. You know, we're to be priests and kings. You know, it's not just about learning. I mean, if all we do is keep it in our head and yet it's you know and not put it out there, then what are we doing? We're hiding our candles under a bushel. You know, we're supposed to be priests and kings, teachers and doers. You know, a royal priesthood after the order of Melchizedek.
True story. True story.
So thank you guys for listening. We're probably gonna read more books on here. There's gonna be more lives and what have you. Again, we're just reaching out. You know, connect with us. So God bless you all.
You guys have a wonderful evening, and I will post the link to the book if you'd like to go download it yourself. And also, if you're curious about the School of Sonship, feel free to message us, and we will kind of give you a rundown on what it's all about. But this is one of the books that's in the orientation class, which is what me and Josiah are doing at the moment. We're in the orientation classes. There's a couple of books, but this was, you know, like I said, one of our all-time favorite stories in the Bible, so we figured we'd do that one first. But if you guys are interested in the School of Sonship, let us know, and we will direct you to where you need to be. And it's a really wonderful school. Benji teaches really good kingdom stuff, and he's already helped me reveal some places where I thought I was okay, and he revealed that maybe I wasn't so okay in those areas, and I definitely needed refinement. Right. And there's nothing wrong with discovering that we need refinement, because it just challenges, you know, and pushes us.
Paul says to esteem all others above ourselves, and that puts us in a position, that gives us a teachable heart and puts us in a position of humility. You know, when we can learn from each other instead of, you know, picking out what we don't like and this and that and blah blah blah. You know, Jesus said we walk in heavenly places now. You know, it's that seed of truth in the sea of lies that is within all of us. You know, where it's the light in the dark place. It's to see that seed of truth that it may be pulled out. You know, we are all one embodied in Christ. You know, we all hold our pieces of truth, and as we come together, you know, we all bring our pieces of truth with us, and therein Christ is in the midst the more. You know, when two or more are gathered. So let us gather, not just in churches, but it's about community. It's about lifestyle. It's about keeping in touch. You know, if we're gonna exhort one another, if we're gonna help each other grow, then we should be investing in each other's lives. So let's do so.
Absolutely, and I know that it's really hard to do that in today's society, when people are very much led by fear, and there's a lot of chaos going on, and a lot of injustice and hate and things in the world that want to distract us from fellowshipping and from getting together, and, you know, just hardening our hearts. And we have to not let the world harden our hearts. We have to gather together and continue to edify each other for the glory of God, for the kingdom.
Yeah, iron sharpens iron, but it's kind of hard to do that when you're busy admiring the polish on your own blade. You know, what happens when iron sharpening iron? There's going to be friction, but it's about seeing past it. It's about, you know, where one finger is pointed, three is pointed back. I said that in the last video. It's something that we need. It's all part of growth. It's not condemnation. It's for growth's sake, because all of our disconnects from truth, all of our disconnects from our identity, they rob us. They rob us of who we are. They rob us of the joy set before us that it is written.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I I think that is going to conclude it unless you're wanting to speak on anything else, Josiah.
No, we'll probably speak again soon.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Josiah has decided he's going to get on live whenever he feels the urge to talk about something he's been studying or whatever, and I'm going to challenge myself to read the Bible every day live with you guys, and challenge you guys to at least hear the Bible every day.
Yeah,
and join in on Spirit Kiss Divine's Bible readings.
One thing that Benji talks about is doing the hard stuff. And
yeah.
I am terrible about reading out loud. It's very, very difficult. My mind is all up in, am I reading correctly? Am I pronouncing this? It's just stupidness. So this is a great thing to overcome, because as I take my mind off of everything else, but put my mind on Christ, it says that He will keep them minds in perfect peace. Keep them in perfect peace whose minds are stayed upon Him. So it really puts that to the test. So that's a challenge. Also going live, the spur of the moment type thing. It's different. There's no editing or anything. But are we not supposed to be living sacrifices? Are we afraid to fall before the brethren for what? For fear of condemnation? There should be no condemnation. It should be conviction, repentance, judgment, restoration. Seriously, it should just be a continual process. We're all in different places, and it's not about vindicating anything. Again, it is only our Father that can identify us. So, as we search for the body of Christ, let our Father show you who the body of Christ is, instead of you trying to decide for yourself who tickles your ears or even who challenges you. Let Him make the decision. And it's going to be people who you may not even think, but relationships need to be formed. Now is the time. The body needs to gather.
Well, I'm super excited that Josiah is going to be going live more often, because I'm excited for the world, because the world gets to be blessed with a good word from our Father through him, because he's very open and he's very intimate, and it shows in his fruits. And I get to listen to him on a daily basis, and I think it's such a blessing. So I think that it's definitely going to be a blessing for you guys, because
she's biased.
Well, it's not that. It's just I see how he strives to keep his intimacy with God, and it shows in his fruits, and so we feed off each other very well. And so I think that what God gives him and reveals to him is stuff that that the world's gonna be very blessed to hear. So I'm excited about it. I hope you guys are excited. So anyway, I think that's it. Are you?
Oh, God bless you guys.
Yeah, blessings.
Just talk. Whether you pray sometimes, whether you've never prayed or just talk to him. If you don't know him, talk to him. Approach him like a friend. It's a relationship. It's progressive. He knew you before you were formed in the womb. There's no decision that you've ever made or will make that will change His love for you. It does not excuse sin, because we will reap what we sow, but it doesn't change His love for us. And in that, there is purpose in the exposure of that sin, because the root of that sin is the intent of the heart, which is a disconnect from truth, which is the false identity that is not in Christ. But when our identity is in Christ, these things are just supposed to naturally fall off. Paul said, now that we've put off sin, let us move on to perfection. So we're even supposed to go beyond just putting off sin, and move on to perfection. And people are afraid of that word, but if you don't, it's not about setting a bar. God is limitless. He has to flow. When we set the bars, when we set a restriction, so why speak death into something that He promises and speaks life into? Anyways, thank you guys for listening, and we will talk to you all soon. Feel free to share, whatever. We're here.
Absolutely. And definitely feel free to reach out. Me and Josiah both check the messenger, so feel free to reach out. And if there's any ladies who are fixing to run across this, check out Spirit Kiss Divine, which is a woman's ministry that is a spin-off from our main ministry together, which is Throne Room. Check out Throneroom111. Throneroom111 and Spirit Kiss Divine.
Yeah. Since we're
definitely reach out to us.
Continually talking for a minute, when it does come to Messenger, if you are a woman and you're messaging us, obviously it's both of us. It's going to be Wendy speaking with you. If you are a man and you're messaging us, it's going to be me speaking with you, and we will be clear which one of us you're speaking to. That way, there's full disclosure in everything, guys. I mean, it's all about being open, being raw, being real. You know, we say come just as you are, but we don't live that every day. It's not to say, oh, then I come with my baggage every day. That excuses me from having to get rid of my baggage. That's BS. You know, it's not that we have to; it's that we get to. You know, we need to change our perspectives with that.
Amen.
So thank you, guys.
All right, guys. Have a great night. Blessings.